Boy, you still awake over there?
Bakugou demanded after a solid 15 minutes of slow breathing, the two of them just lying beside each other. I'm awake, Ichiro verified. Are you?
What kind of stupid-ass question is that?
Bakugou scoffed.
I'm the one who asked you. It should be a given that I'm awake.
He elbowed Ichiro sharply in the ribs as he said this. It's almost 5. Ichiro noted, ignoring the pain in his side and glancing at the little clock at Bakugou's bedside. Are you hungry?
I'm a hell of a lot more horny than I am hungry.
Bakugou grumbled.
But yeah, I guess I could eat.
We could give it an hour or two before dinner, Ichiro suggested.
Sure.
Bakugou agreed.
Like I said, I'm not all that hungry.
This was not the conversation that Ichiro actually wanted to be having, but he was having a hard time figuring out how to start the conversation he wanted to be having. Okay, he said weakly. Bakugou sighed heavily, shifting so he was propped up on one elbow, his crimson eyes staring down at Ichiro with undisguised irritation.
What do you want?
He demanded. Oh. Ichiro blinked in confusion. What do you mean?
You're obviously thinking about something serious.
Bakugou snapped.
You've got that stupid wrinkle between your eyebrows. Here.
Then he poked Ichiro's forehead, pressing his index finger against him for a few seconds before removing it.
So what is it?
Just... How did you apologize for accidentally doing things that reminded your friend? Could Ichiro mentally call him lover or mate now? Was that taking things too fast? Of his recent sexual assault? Sorry for the, He was stalling, and he still wasn't sure how to say what he was thinking. Fortunately, Bakugou was smart enough to figure out what Ichiro was trying to accomplish.
Are you about to fucking apologize for making out with me?
He jabbed a fist into Ichiro's gut. Not gently, but certainly not at full force either. It was something of a love tap, a light punch to catch Ichiro's attention more than anything.
That's not your problem to worry about.
But I was on top of you and it made you. Ichiro began to protest, but Bakugou interrupted him, speaking loudly.
Not your problem,
he insisted.
Besides, you listened and we made it work, so I don't get why you're still bothered by it.
I don't want to remind you of...
Well, tough shit, because I'd never been touched by an alpha that way before he came along.
Bakugou snapped, sitting up fully and glaring down at Ichiro.
So it's going to happen.
Ichiro fought down a growl at the thought of that creep being Bakugou's first anything. It made him so angry that he could barely see straight. Bad enough to lose to another alpha because he'd been too afraid to make a move. But for another alpha to have intimate moments with Bakugou because he had not been given an alternative. Horrific and infuriating. Just because it's going to happen doesn't mean I have to like it, Ichiro grumbled.
So do things with me that he didn't do.
Bakugou shot back, looking like he wished Ichiro were sitting up too so he could elbow him again.
Like letting me suck your dick.
Ichiro couldn't hold in the amusement at that statement. Oh my god, he gasped. You have such a one-track mind. Bakugou glared down at him, obviously irked.
Can you fucking blame me?
He snapped and reached down between Ichiro's legs, resting his hand there for a moment before squeezing gently and sneering at Ichiro's shell-shocked expression.
Who wouldn't want this?
For his own part, Ichiro was very consciously trying to not react to Bakugo's touch. He said, which is about all he could manage, as most of his brain power was occupied with the fact that Bakugo was cupping him through his pants. With a sigh, Bakugo let him go, which was a relief because for a few seconds there Ichiro had felt as though he were about to combust. He gasped for breath for a moment, trying to get his brain to function normally again, while Bakugo gazed down at him, dark amusement glinting in his gaze. The blonde shifted his weight, moving one leg over the edge of the bed and extending a hand towards Ichiro.
Get up,
he told him, and Ichiro complied, gripping Bakugo's hand and finally sitting up himself. So, dinner? Ichiro suggested. Bakugo nodded.
Let's go.
Leaving the heat house at 8 o'clock with all the day visit alphas was one of the hardest things Ichiro had ever done. He knew, logically, that Bakugo would be fine, that he was just going to sleep or whatever, but it was still hard to walk away. It felt like he was abandoning his friend, and that didn't sit well with Ichiro. In fact, it bothered him so much that he didn't even go straight home. Instead, he went to Bakugo's apartment first. A 2 LDK in a nice neighborhood, which was only affordable due to the fact that Ground Zero merch sold like hotcakes. So his salary was well padded by various companies paying top dollar for the right to use the Ground Zero image. He let himself into the apartment, only to stop short as something occurred to him. Shouldn't Bakugo's apartment key have been a sign of something to Ichiro? He'd always assumed Bakugo had trusted him with it because they were best friends. But the fact that an Omega trusted an Alpha with his apartment key, that was risky in a lot of ways, and Ichiro's heart felt full as he realized just how much Bakugo must have trusted him to give him something like that. Shaking his head sharply, Ichiro tried to push aside the thoughts that had momentarily rooted him to the floor and got moving. He'd come here for a reason, after all. First, he found Bakugo's coffee and grabbed the pour-over filter, because he knew that's how the blonde liked to prepare his coffee. Next, he headed to Bakugo's bathroom, retrieving his shampoo, conditioner, and body wash and packed them up as well. Absently, he recalled Bakugo's complaints about the lack of high-protein meals at the heat house, so he rummaged around until he found Bakugo's protein supplement powder, and put some of that in a smaller container. He realized that Bakugo might also want to do some weight training, so he scuttled down the hall into the spare room that Bakugo had converted into something of a home gym, and grabbed some free weights. Now his pile of things was starting to get pretty heavy, but he glanced around once more, just in case he'd forgotten something. Satisfied that he thought of most everything, he packed up what he could fit into his shoulder bag. He was glad he'd brought it, but tomorrow he'd need to wear a backpack to smuggle in all of these supplies. Oh well. With a weight in each hand and an overstuffed bag slung over his shoulder, Ichiro headed back out into the night, ready to head for his apartment, though he doubted he would be sleeping anytime soon. Logically, Katsuki knew he should shower before bed, but the little bit of Kirishima's scent that had made it past their neutralizer clung to his clothes, and Katsuki didn't want to wash that smell away. He wanted to keep it, wrap it around himself like a fucking blanket or some shit. He wanted to be surrounded by the smell of Kirishima, and the barest hints of scent he'd gotten on himself and his clothes would have to suffice. Since he was already being pretty shameless about the whole smell thing, he didn't bother holding back. Flipping face first onto his bed, he inhaled deeply in the spot where Kirishima had lain for almost 3 whole hours. Fuck. It had been such a good idea to put him on his bed. It meant Katsuki could get a better smell from the spot after he left, and it would still be there after showering, too. And Katsuki would shower, just not right away. Not when he could spend time basking in the faint musk of Kirishima on his blankets. He groaned, reaching down and palming himself as he fought to catch the scent of the alpha, buried beneath blockers and neutralizers, but still lingering tantalizingly along the blankets, like it was almost enough. With a grunt, Katsuki forced himself to stand up and stop before he made a mess of himself over a fucking stinky blanket, stripping down and heading into his bathroom for a shower after all. He made it fast, and had to think hard about whether or not to use the damn flower soaps. He ended up just scrubbing his body and hair with the hand soap, because it was the least scented thing in the bathroom. That done, he toweled off and tugged on his pajamas, which was really nothing more than a comfortable t-shirt and a clean pair of boxer briefs. He resisted the urge to smell the hollow spot on his blanket for about 10 seconds before he gave in and took one more deep breath from the blanket before tugging the covers back. A knock sounded on his door.
Damn it.
Kotsky muttered under his breath and stomped over to the door, opening it.
What?
Arakaki blinked up at him. "Hey, man," she said. "I just wanted to check in, see how you were doing."
I'm about to sleep.
Bakugou told her, not sure what more Sundress Girl wanted from him. Shrugging one shoulder, Arakaki grinned at him. "Sure, you can do that. I was just wondering if you and your guy worked things out."
Why the hell is that any of your business?
Kotsky demanded irritably, of half a mind to slam the door in her face. "Oh, it really isn't," Arakaki assured him, grin widening. "But did you? I gotta know." Kotsky was really ready to sleep, and definitely not talk about all the things he and Kirishima didn't work out that day.
If you must know, the answer is not really. Now fuck off.
The young woman stroked her chin thoughtfully, though the master sleuth effect was somewhat ruined by the fact that she was wearing mint green flower pattern pajamas. "I see," she said, even though Kotsky wasn't sure what the hell she meant by that. "So he's shy then?" Kotsky blinked twice, feeling his mouth drop open of its own volition.
How the fuck?
He cut himself off, but then changed his mind and decided he'd like to know the answer after all.
How did you know that?
He demanded.
You talked to him for like 5 seconds.
I'd say it was a little more than 5 seconds. Arakaki protested, moving past Kotsky and into the room like she goddamn owned the place. As for how I knew, well, not all Omegas are as bad at dealing with alphas as you are. Kotsky wasn't sure whether to take that as an insult or a compliment, but based off the teasing smirk she was tossing his direction, he was pretty sure she'd meant it as an insult.
Fuck you,
he snapped, shutting the door behind her.
I'm plenty good at handling alphas.
Oh, sure. You're good at threatening them and confusing them. Arakaki shot back with a smirk, tossing her brown hair over one shoulder and moving towards his bed before pausing, turning, and raising an eyebrow in Kotsky's direction. "Ooh, this smells like him," she noted, pointing at the center of the bed and wiggling her eyebrows a few more times, probably just to annoy him. "Anyway, as I was saying, you're terrible with alphas." Kotsky still felt the urge to kick her out, but the small part of him that wasn't smarting with pride was curious.
What makes you say that?
He demanded. Well, Arakaki perched on the very end of the bed, far from Kirishima's spot and making sure not to come between it and where Bakugou would probably be laying, which was thoughtful but also embarrassing because it meant she knew he'd want to smell it as much as possible. "I could tell right away that your guy is painfully, inexperienced, and also kind of clueless." Kotsky blinked at her. She wasn't wrong, but...
How the hell did you figure that out?
He demanded. Arakaki gave him an exasperated look. He barely knew how to talk to Omegas who hadn't even started flirting. He just screamed, "I'm gay," and hoped it would work. Kotsky barely resisted the urge to slap an open palm to his forehead.
Oh my god, he's a colossal fucking idiot.
Yeah, but he's your idiot, Arakaki replied with a sly grin. Anyway, the point I was trying to make is, he's nervous, and he seems like the type to panic when an unfamiliar or awkward situation presents itself. Kotsky couldn't in good conscience allow the slander to continue.
The man is a fucking pro hero. He doesn't panic.
Maybe not in hero situations, but he's a hell of a rookie when it comes to any sort of mating rituals, Arakaki pointed out. He just hasn't had any, training? She cocked her head slightly. Does that analogy make sense? Katsuki scowled but grudgingly admitted.
I guess.
So he's a rookie. He's nervous, Arakaki explained. It'll be hard for him to make a move unless you can help him feel comfortable.
This conversation isn't making me comfortable.
Katsuki grumbled, though he didn't really mean it, and they both knew it.
Don't I get anything out of this?
Do you want to mate him or not? Arakaki demanded. Because the good ones take work. They're so focused on being respectful they can forget to have fun and just enjoy things sometimes.
Does your big nose guy have similar issues?
Katsuki asked. Big nose. Arakaki repeated, brow furrowing in momentary confusion before her eyes widened and she barked out a single hearty laugh. You mean Yamanaka? She asked for confirmation, then didn't bother waiting for Katsuki to respond before saying, Oh yeah, he's useless. So damn set on being respectful that he can barely bring himself to hold my hand, and he's been here every day after work for a whole week now. Katsuki stared at her, dumbfounded. There were other idiots like Kirishima out there. Unbelievable.
What the fuck?
He said.
Why?
To be fair, I like going slow in cases where I don't really know the guy all that well. So I'm not actually complaining, Arakaki pointed out. But you and your alpha are close, right? So it shouldn't be hard to get things moving.
I think he's still worried about me,
Katsuki said.
So I'm not sure how to help him feel more confident with a situation like that.
Arakaki made a face like maybe she agreed with Kirishima. It had to be a fucking conspiracy, a bunch of overprotective warriors coming at him from all sides. Yeah, now that you mention it, are you sure you're okay after all that? Because it's important to be honest with him. Her eyes narrowed as she considered Katsuki. And yourself. Katsuki glared at her for a moment.
We talked.
She glared back. How much? Katsuki resented the inquisition this conversation had become.
Enough,
he snapped.
Look, I gotta deal with this shit my way, and I'm gonna do it on my schedule, and it's none of your fucking business to know when or how I do it.
Arakaki considered him for a long moment. You're right. She finally agreed. It is your choice, but do give yourself the time and space to work through things properly, and don't hesitate to reach out if you need someone. Katsuki nodded sharply, not quite able to make eye contact.
Yeah.
Arakaki leaned over and patted him on the shoulder. I'll see you at breakfast tomorrow. Katsuki chuckled and looked her in the eye this time.
If you insist.
Oh, you know I do. Arakaki replied with a jaunty wink and saw herself out. Ichiro crashed through the door to his apartment, almost literally, since he had cradled both weights in his left arm to unlock the door and nearly dropped them. Considering how late it was, the neighbors would have definitely heard the weights hit the ground and been irritated by the disruption. Of course, thrusting them against the door to try and pin them close to hold on to them wasn't much better, making a loud thump and popping the door open. Scurrying inside, Kirishima shut the door and shed his shoes, donning a pair of house slippers and shuffling across the floor to his living room, specifically the coffee table. Setting down the weights, followed by the rest of the materials he'd gathered at Bakugou's apartment, Ichiro unloaded his arms onto the table. Once he'd arranged the protein powder, coffee, and toiletries to his satisfaction, he threw himself face down on his couch and sighed heavily. He still had a lot to think about, and that alpha bastard who had hurt Bakugou was at the top of his list. Except that Ichiro knew almost nothing about him, not his name, his age, his quirk, or if he had a criminal record. But he was hoping to change that, preferably that very night. Still, Ichiro recognized his own limitations. He wasn't the information-gathering researcher type of hero, and probably never would be. He did, however, know a certain hero who excelled at information-gathering, and it was to him that he would be reaching out. With a grunt, he rolled over on the couch, pulling out his phone and scowling. If he asked Bakugou for the name of that alpha, how would he react? Would it upset him? He didn't want to risk it. Better to go with what little he knew, and not drag Bakugou into this if he could help it. He pulled up his text and sent off a quick message to Midoriya. "Hey man, I have a problem and I could use some help." It didn't take long for Midoriya to reply, which was good, because Ichiro was getting more antsy by the minute, and he wasn't even sure why. It wasn't like the Alpha could do anything now. Still, he didn't like being separated from Bakugou after what had happened. It left him feeling useless. He couldn't protect Bakugou from the shit that had happened because of his own cowardice, his own unwillingness to risk being hurt. Trying to fix it was the least he could do, and he couldn't do that until he knew more about that goddamn Alpha. His phone vibrated as the text came in. "I'll do what I can. What's the problem?" Ichiro considered that for a minute. He didn't want to out Bakugou in all this. Then again, he didn't necessarily have to. "There's this Alpha at a heat house who harassed a mandatory Ichiro paused, frowning at the message, and then deleted the last few words, changing it slightly. "There's this Alpha at a heat house who assaulted a mandatory resident." He sent it, then realized that more information was probably necessary. "The staff didn't even worry about it because the Alpha doesn't look threatening and mandatory residents are low on the priority list, I guess. But it's bullshit, yeah. Like this Alpha used some sort of weird fluid stuff on the Omega's mating gland to trigger his heat or something. The Omega keeps saying it's not a heat, though. But that might be a lie he's convinced himself of. I don't know. I'm just really worried, I guess, and I don't want anything bad to happen. And I gotta know if this Alpha has done this before, but I don't know how to find out anything like that." Ichiro stared at the wall of text he'd sent to Midoriya, and had the grace to feel slightly embarrassed, since Bakugou was constantly harassing him for sending a million texts instead of keeping his thoughts contained to a single message. Still, Midoriya was probably fine with that, and he was a good dude. So it's not like a little bit of annoyance with the multiple texts was going to stop him from helping out. "So you want to know if this Alpha has done this before? Assault mandatory resident Omegas in heat houses." Ichiro sighed in relief. "Yeah." For nearly a minute there was no reply, and then another text came in. "Okay, that should be doable. But we need some more specifics. So you said there was an unusual substance present on the Omega's mating gland, that the victim was a mandatory resident, and that the victim thought they were not going into heat because of the assault, but the response created by the incident produced a behavior that seemed consistent with being in heat." Ichiro had to read it a few times to make sure Midoriya wasn't missing anything. It seemed to be pretty much what he just said, so he texted back a quick reply. "Yes." Midoriya replied a bit faster this time. "So you think it's possible that the Alpha in question has done this before?" Ichiro frowned. He just didn't know. He had no information at all. What the hell was he even doing trying to solve something like this with absolutely no relevant information? "Honestly, I don't know. I don't have any details. I wasn't going to pry because I didn't want to make the victim relive the incident." Midoriya's reply was swift and brutally honest. "Does the victim want to press charges at all? Or are you just championing their cause without knowing much of anything about the incident or what they want to do about it?" Well, that cut straight through to the heart of the matter, didn't it? Ichiro winced at the question staring up at him, and he realized that he'd never actually asked Bakugou what he wanted to do about the Alpha. Maybe Bakugou didn't want to catch the guy. Maybe he just wanted to forget. Maybe. Damn it. Maybe he should just ask Bakugou instead of putting words in his mouth. "Shit. You're right. Just a second, I'll ask." He switched from his conversation with Midoriya to messages from Bakugou and froze, seeing the video that the alpha creep had sent him from Bakugou's phone. He wanted to throw his phone across the room just seeing it, and now realizing exactly what he was seeing in that goddamn video. It just made him feel that much worse. Holy fucking shit, that was a video of Bakugou being assaulted. The very idea made his stomach churn and his mouth prickled like he was about to puke. He couldn't bear to even look at the thumbnail. Convulsively, he closed the messages and took a deep breath. A realization struck him, so painful it actually cramped his stomach. He had to watch it. He had to look for clues. His hand shook as he opened the video. The alpha smirks at the camera as he lifts it up to show Bakugou, eyes squeezed shut, face carefully controlled. With a grunt, the alpha runs his other hand up along Bakugou's chest, huffing in amusement as Bakugou arches into the touch, then immediately tenses. He is uncomfortable, and his face is turned away from the alpha, but his body still moves like it wants something his mind is set on resisting. The camera swings jerkily, and the alpha is running his hand along the side of Bakugou's neck, inhaling so deeply as he leans in that the sound is captured by the phone's mic. The reason for the angle change is made apparent when the alpha leans in, licking a stripe up the side of Bakugou's neck, and then wraps his mouth around the sensitive mating gland, sucking on it for a few moments before drawing back, nipping at it gently. The sound Bakugou makes is halfway between a moan and a sob, and the alpha's mouth twists into a cruel sneer at the sound. As his mouth pulls away, the camera captures a string of saliva dangling from his mouth. It's wet and shiny, and it's glowing, ever so slightly. The video cut off there, and Ichiro gasped for air, realizing he'd been holding his breath through the entirety of the video. It was only 23 seconds long, but watching it had seemed to take an eternity. What the hell had been with his saliva, though? It had been radiating a pale blue glow that was anything but natural, and suddenly Ichiro was wondering if maybe the weird fluid he'd found wasn't a lab-created substance at all, but actually something the alpha had generated with his own body. Was it a quirk? Holy shit, was it a heat-triggering quirk? Or something else? He didn't know, but it changed the game considerably, because now he had something like proof that the alpha had actually done something to Bakugou, something weird that might explain why Bakugou had been so insistent. Oh shit. If this alpha really had done this before, how many Omegas had he managed to assault simply because he'd been able to trigger their heats and take advantage of them? The very idea was horrifying. Rather than dwell on that, he quickly downloaded the video to his own phone as evidence, because if Bakugou wanted to delete it, he wanted to be sure Bakugou could do so without destroying evidence that they might need to take the alpha down. Not that he was particularly happy about having shit like that on his phone either, but if someone had to deal with it, better for it to be Ichiro than Bakugou. That done, he texted Bakugou. Hey man, quick question. Did you want to prosecute the asshole who took advantage of you? Because I don't know his name or quirk or anything like that, but you could probably help figure out how to take him down. For a long, long while, there was no answer. Then the previous video message from Bakugou disappeared from the chat. Still no answer. Ichiro was starting to get antsy, worrying that maybe he should have asked in person instead of over text. He was sort of bad at figuring out what kinds of things should be face-to-face discussions, and what was appropriate over text. He was already regretting not being there so that Bakugou had someone to be there for him when he found the damn video, and realized what that asshole alpha had done. But it was too late for that now. He just had to wait and see what Bakugou's response would.
I will fucking murder that bastard. Fucking explode him.
For a long moment, Ichiro just stared at the messages, not sure how to respond to that. On the one hand, he was in 100% agreement with the sentiment, but he also couldn't tell over text if Bakugou was actually serious or not. He couldn't actually agree to help Bakugou murder someone. It would be vigilantism at best, downright criminal at worst. The justice system existed for a reason, and even heroes weren't above the law. Another message arrived with a buzz.
What do you need to know?
Sighing in relief, Ichiro answered. Name, possible criminal history, Does it seem like he's done this before? The answers rolled in quickly.
Adachi. Forgot his given name. Think it started with a K. Kenji? Fuck it. Not sure about criminal history, but he's a damn good pickpocket. Stole my fucking suppressants without me noticing. Definitely not his first time taking advantage of a mandatory resident. He knows exactly how far to go without alerting staff.
Ichiro nodded, then texted back. Did you notice anything like a quirk? He hesitated for another moment before adding a quick note. It seems like maybe his saliva is... Kirishima paused and considered the text. What the hell even was that alpha's saliva? Well, he would just have to take the easier route. It seems like maybe his saliva is related to his quirk. Bakugou replied quickly to that one too.
Possible. That stuff was fucking gross.
Ichiro nodded. Thanks for the help. You okay? For a long moment, there was no reply. Bakugou began typing, paused, and began typing again. Finally, his message arrived.
Been better, that's for fucking sure. But I can count on you, so it's not the worst I've been.
Ichiro was relieved, but also he wasn't entirely sure he bought it. Bakugou's response that he wanted to explode the alpha, Adachi, had seemed a lot more genuine, but he would give Bakugou the benefit of the doubt. Besides, they could talk more the next day. For now, he and Midoriya needed to see if there was anything out there that might help them take Adachi down. Okay, I've got some more information. Alpha's name is Adachi. Seems like maybe his saliva can make Omegas go into heat. Quirk, maybe. And he's good at picking pockets and knows the way to assault Omegas without getting caught by Heat House staff. Midoriya didn't answer right away, and for a terrifying moment, Ichiro thought he might have fallen asleep. He couldn't do this on his own, but if Midoriya had already gone to bed, he wouldn't have a choice in the matter. He glanced at the clock and winced. Damn, it was already 1 a.m. No wonder Midoriya had gone to sleep. What area is the heat house in? There are apparently a lot of police cases that involve heat triggers near heat houses, so a region would be good to help narrow down our options. Cross-referencing that with the sleight of hand and mandatory residency might get us something more solid to work with. I logged into our system remotely, so I won't actually need to go into the office to look this over. Honestly, this doesn't really fall into our jurisdiction. We're more scorched earth type heroes, you know? If all his quirk does is trigger heats, then it's better to let the police handle it. Ichiro scowled. Midoriya might be right, but there was no way in hell he was going to let the police take down the bastard who had assaulted Bakugou. This was his fight now, his and Bakugou's. Possibly also Midoriya's, now that he'd sort of brought him in on it. The heat house is called the Gentle Embrace. Midoriya didn't respond for a long moment. Whoa, this is weird. The message was both unhelpful and incredibly distressing to Ichiro. What did that mean? Weird. What kind of weird? Good weird, bad weird, weird weird. There have been almost a dozen reports of sexual assault coming from that same heat house. All of the mandatory residents, all claiming that their suppressants were stolen and their heats triggered. The establishment claims that it isn't responsible for any lost or stolen items within the premises, which is just typical liability verbiage, and the alpha that was responsible for the assault is described very differently each time. Damn, that's probably why no one noticed this otherwise painfully obvious pattern. The name, hair color, eye color, and type of dress are all different. The only common thread I could find is that the mandatory residents are all male, and the alpha is reportedly small and came across as meek at first. Ichiro felt his pulse quicken as he scanned the information. He went back and read it once more to be certain he'd seen all the relevant information. If he looks different and uses a different name every time, how the hell are we supposed to catch the bastard? I'm going to ignore the fact that you're still saying we when this sort of thing is better left to the police than heroes. And I'm also going to point out that the obvious answer is a sting operation. But I still think the police should be the ones to set that up, not us. I see your point, but how long is that going to take? Can't we get approval to take this guy down ourselves? Maybe. But aren't you supposed to be on rut season? By the time you get back, the police might already have it well in hand anyway.
I'm fine with coming back from rut season early if it means I get the chance to take this asshole down personally.
I'm sensing that you really want to do this.
I'm gonna do this.
Fine, then I'll fill out the necessary forms. I guess we could probably argue that not knowing the exact methods he is using to change his appearance and trigger the heats means we don't have firm enough knowledge of his quirk to risk the lives of police officers. It's a bit shaky, but I'll see what I can do. With luck, the paperwork should go through in a day or two.
Thanks, man. I really owe you for this.
Don't thank me yet. We still don't know if they'll greenlight the operation.
Thanks for listening and doing your best, then.
Okay. I'll accept thanks for that at least. Get some sleep now, okay?
I will. Ichiro shoved his phone back into his pocket and sighed. He was tired, but he was also anxious. He didn't think he'd be able to sleep for a while. Despite his misgivings, by the time the light of morning had reached his eyes, he had succumbed to his resigned exhaustion, still splayed out on his couch, forehead crinkled in concern.